I'm going to set this aside because I have no need for it, so I don't want to be fiddling with it. So thank you very much for having me here today. As Fran just said, I'm an adoptive parent who has worked with Fast Forward in our Highlands parent focus group. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my family's experience and, specifically around our son and his gaming addiction. I recently enjoyed a fantastic novel by Christopher Brookmyre and his wife Maria Heitzman that they wrote under the pseudonym Ambrose Parry called The Weight of All Flesh, which is a cracking yarn set in 19th century Edinburgh, with many of the scenes based around this very area of the Royal Mile, the Cannon Gate and the closes of the old time. Whilst reading, I noted the following passage. Sarah looked at his face, the dark circles round his eyes, the scar still livid on his cheek, and felt her anger subside. My grandmother once told me about a king who sought a single thought that would raise his spirits when they were low, but keep him vigilant when he was happy. Raven lifted his head, curious if not optimistic about what she might be able to offer. A wise man told the king but 4 words, "This too will pass." Reading this passage really struck a chord with me, as this exact mantra has got me and my somewhat anxiety-ridden brain through many a difficult chapter in the story of our family. Today, I'd like to take the next few minutes to tell you a little bit about our tale and how I came to work with the team at Fast Forward and the Scottish Gambling Hub. Now, at the risk of telling my granny how to suck eggs, I would like to quickly touch on the general thinking, if there is such a thing, on how addiction links to early years trauma in children. I'm an avid listener of the Armchair Expert podcast, which I thoroughly recommend if you're not aware of it. And they recently featured an interview with a world-renowned addiction specialist, Gabor Mate, who was quoted earlier, I noticed, who explained that coming from the Latin word for slavery, addiction is manifested through any behaviour in which a person finds temporary relief or pleasure and therefore craves, but then suffers negative consequences in the long term, yet doesn't give up the behaviour despite the negative consequences. So pleasure, craving relief in the short term, harm in the long term, refusal and or inability to give up the harmful behaviour. And as we all know, addiction can relate to anything from drugs to drink, shopping to sex, food to, in my child's case, gaming, although he arguably has issues with food as well. As an individual who has experienced trauma during childhood, you are thought to be at an increased risk of developing an addiction of some kind. You're unlikely to have processed your traumatic experience effectively given your young age, meaning you're likely to suffer long-lasting negative effects, possibly for the rest of your life. The stress experienced through trauma has a direct impact on the body's limbic system, including the regulation of the body's reward system. Survivors of childhood abuse will also often turn to things like alcohol, drugs, or gaming to escape the pain of their reality. But these potentially destructive behaviours tend to take over the brain's reward system, causing overpowering cravings that are extremely hard to break away from. Sadly, even when someone tries to quit, the brain's reward system may not fire for alternative good choices, making it all the more difficult to stop the destructive behaviour. So how does this translate into the day-to-day experience of an adopted family? My husband and I were introduced to our children, a sibling group of 3, 2 girls and a boy, in 2010 when they were aged 9, 6 and 5. Although a hugely stressful time, including legal challenges, post-box contact negotiations, and 3 traumatised children to look after, each challenge we faced was dealt with and our family moved on. Cue the mantra. This too shall pass. As the weeks, months and years ticked by, negative behaviours became less and less, the legal aspects of the adoption were finalised and the children gradually settled. Looking back, I'd say our son was initially the easiest of the 3 to parent. In general, he was well behaved, got on well at school and was enjoyable company. He was my wee pal. There were definitely certain behaviours that could be said were typical of a care experienced child, but overall these were manageable. This sadly was not to last. Our son was about to turn 12 when we decided to gift him his first gaming console for Christmas, an Xbox. To be honest, we didn't give it a lot of thought. His younger cousins already had one, and it seemed an appropriate gift to give him. He had prior exposure to gaming in a foster home and had played a little on the Nintendo Wii that we had at the house. It had been noted that he was very excited when playing on this. However, we felt it was no more than anyone else's age, and so we didn't flag this as an issue. In retrospect, I'd say that these were in fact key red flags to the coming situation. Around the same time, we decided to move house, not far, just a few miles, in order to be closer to the local high school. This process was unsettling for our son, and at a time that he was about to transfer to secondary school, a key moment that we've already mentioned earlier. There were signs that he was very stressed, but as an overthinker and an anxious child, we hoped that the routine and reliability of family life would be enough to reassure him no matter where we lived. The second aggravating factor in the mix was his subsequent move to high school. Unbeknown to us, he was struggling with friends, and one boy in particular, who had been his classmate in primary, had started to actively bully him. This child knew our son was adopted and used this information as ammunition in his teasing. The bullying went on for years, with our son refusing to confide in anyone as to how serious it was. School became a place where he was terrified, constantly on high alert, and his academic work gradually fell by the wayside as he got further and further behind. The final element in the mix was his unresolved trauma. I'm really sorry, I am desperate for a tissue. My cold has finally come out. Thank you so much. Excuse me. Thank you. Yes, as he settled down with us, behaviours linked to his early years experience bubbled up. He had very few memories of his time with his birth family, but ironically this led him to mistrust the narrative of why he had been adopted. This quickly moved into outright anger towards my husband and me, and he saw his adopted status as being our fault. I know that's not unusual. Our bright and happy boy became ashamed of who he was. He at once hated being adopted, whilst at the same time tried to use his adopted status to gain attention and sympathy. Gaming crept in at school through his phone, at break times, and then during class. Meanwhile, his lack of achievement at school only added to his feelings of shame. At home, all this translated into one thing: total and utter obsession with gaming. I would suggest that this was exacerbated by the old favourite, Fortnite. For those of you that don't know why it's so addictive, it's been designed specifically to be the absolute key length of time that just keeps you playing over and over and over again. So 20 minutes max, and then you're on to the next game. It was the escape route out of his head, out of the reality of the life that he was struggling with so much. Being able to wipe all thoughts of bullying, failure, abandonment and adoption, coupled with massive dopamine dumps from the thrill of achievement, is a very hard drug to quit once you start. You're anonymous online too, so you can be whoever you want to be behind the screen and no one knows the truth. Sadly, this led to some extremely challenging situations. Early on, we had recognised that he couldn't have the Xbox in his bedroom, as he would be up literally all night. So it was put in the living room for him to access at agreed times. This quickly led to it being unplugged and placed in our bedroom overnight, as he would sneak down to play after everyone was in bed. He learnt that if he reset the unit back to factory settings, he could set it back up with a new profile that would get around all of the parental controls we had in place without us knowing. He researched how to reset the Wi-Fi router to get around any controls that we had on that. After he snuck the unit out of our bedroom on a couple of occasions, we eventually had to succumb and put a lock on our bedroom door. It became akin to us all living in his game. The skills he learned to evade being caught or killed online were being pitted against us as we tried to manage his access, and home life became a constant battle of wits. Gaming devices of all shapes and sizes, from smartphones to laptops and even an additional Xbox, were bought by him online and delivered to friends' houses for him to smuggle in and after school. Any money he had was spent on Xbox vouchers, freely available to buy in the local co-op, that he used for loot boxes or in-game purchases. I have to say, one key thing we never did was put our bank details anywhere near his account. So that was something that we were kind of aware of. We delayed any encouragement of him getting a Saturday job because of, we knew all the money would go on gaming, which led to more resentment from him towards us and great frustration on our part that he was essentially being held back from developing more responsibility. This culminated in the discovery that he had stolen from one of his friends and a family member to the tune of hundreds of pounds. Then our local council gave all high school pupils a Chromebook each. Great. And the nightmare was added to. All he used it for was gaming rather than schoolwork, even during class time. That too had to be kept in our bedroom overnight. The sheer exhaustion of it all would mean that on one occasion, whilst my husband was on night shift, I forgot to take the Chromebook into our room for 2 nights in a row. I couldn't understand why our son's mood had become so disagreeable until we realised that he had not slept at all in 3 days. The history on the laptop confirmed this. Eventually, we had to ask the school to help, and he was told to hand the Chromebook in at the end of the school day. On one occasion, he went to a sleepover at a friend's house where they gave him their sister's Chromebook to use for the evening. Obviously, I'm unaware of his issues. Whilst his friend went to bed, our son stayed up all night playing on it until he was discovered the next morning. To say the mum was shocked is an understatement. There were multiple times that he ran away from home, in the pitch dark, in the freezing snow. We live very close to the top of Scotland, so it's in the dead of winter, not a kind of good place to be out overnight. He spent the night at my mum's, until the time he refused to come home at all. He spent the night at my mum's, but still refused to come home the next day. As he was only 14 at the time, we decided to call the police, who brought him home. That was a difficult weekend. Then there was the time that, having been told he needed to finish homework before he could get his Xbox, he contemplated stabbing me. I don't wish to go into the full details of what happened, but needless to say, this was the straw that finally broke the camel's back. Following this incident, we reconnected with our local social work office, and this led to him spending a short time back in foster care ahead of a referral to CAMHS. I should say at this point that we have been very fortunate in that we have had mental health support both for us and our children right from the beginning of our adoptive journey. Our son had counselling throughout primary, which we organised privately, and was seen later by our local CAMHS service following the knife incident for a number of years. Since then, he has also undergone therapeutic life story work with a specially trained social worker, a process I would highly recommend for all care experienced children. None of this was able to avert his path to addiction. It's also very clear that all the therapy in the world is rendered useless unless the individual wants to engage. In the case of our son, he spent his teenage years being far too angry to want to be helped. So high school has come and gone 18 months ago, and our son currently has a full-time job with a local landscape gardener, which is fantastic, lots of fresh air and exercise, but he is still struggling to manage his gaming. Some might say we are interfering too much given his age. I should therefore say that we have tried to take a step back and left him to his own devices, no pun intended. Believe me, the level of mental exhaustion brought on by having to constantly worry about what is happening with his computer is something I am only too keen to let go of. However, the result of this was many nights of no sleep, not just for him, but us as well. We can hear every footfall in his room from our bed and are kept awake each night that he doesn't sleep. With the introduction of his own wage, our concerns have become reality. He can go out and buy whatever gaming equipment he wants, which is exactly what has happened. New and additional screens, a PC, upgraded memory, another Xbox, laptops which get smuggled in under our noses. The behaviours are still the same as when he was 13, and he gets caught every time. But this has essentially rendered our attempts to manage his access useless. Our current concerns are around his ability to hold down a job, as he has the ability to game 24/7, and the challenge comes when we are not there to support him. He doesn't yet have the self-control to recognise that he needs to sleep before he loses his job or an arm. Hedge trimmers are not to be messed with. This is proven on the few occasions that my husband and I have both been away overnight and our son has had to work the following morning. Like last night, for example, I haven't phoned home to find out. Despite there being other adults in the house, he stays up gaming and has not gone to work the next day. The overarching frustration is how much he's stuck developmentally. Being so obsessed with gaming means the rest of his life is on hold. He's taken driving lessons and is a very good driver, but has failed his theory test 3 times simply because he won't take the time to study. Every waking moment of his spare time is spent in front of a screen. He can't even go in the shower without having his phone playing a YouTube video at the same time. The fear for us all is that he's still sitting in his bedroom playing games when he's 35 and life is totally passing him by. Around 5 months ago, after yet another discovery that he had tried to break into our room to access his PC, yes, he has tried to pick the lock, the purchase of 2 additional laptops that were smuggled in again, we felt we'd reached the point of having to make an ultimatum. Either he recognised he needed help, or we'd have to look for somewhere else to live. He therefore began therapy, which he is paying for himself, I might add. And whilst he is engaging in this and is being helped to work through his trauma, the flip side is that his need to escape from the memories and thoughts that are boiling up to the surface is more overpowering than ever. So, rather inevitably, we've recently discovered another Xbox in his room only 2 weeks ago. Since then, as I've said, we've given up trying to manage his access to devices, and he therefore has both his Xbox and his PC in his room for the past couple of weeks. Yes, he gets up for work. No, he does not sleep enough. On nights where there is a new release of Fortnite, for example, he's up until the early hours of the morning and then exhausted and grumpy for work. There have been a few difficult moments with his boss recently, directly linked to a perceived attitude problem, so his job is likely at risk if there isn't a change. Thankfully, he seems to be slowly coming to the realisation that he can't continue to operate on little to no sleep and still hold down a job. There are other positive signs too. Somewhere along the line, and especially after his life story work, he lost a lot of the anger he held for us. He does household chores when asked, and for the most part, he looks after himself. Very recent conversations, like 2 days ago, I have been changing this daily on the run up to today, have been around resitting his driving test and consideration of college courses, essentially because his boss has gone spare at him. So yeah, it's, you know, he is realising that the warnings we have been warning him about are finally breaking through the ticker tape. A chink of light at the end of the tunnel, maybe. Whilst none of this is the worst story you'll ever hear on gambling or gaming and its effects on someone, for our family it has been an extremely challenging few years. I think the biggest issue for me has been the hopefully temporary loss of the real him. We lived with an extremely kind, thoughtful, gentle boy who at times has become unrecognisable. In general, he's distant, keeping to his room and choosing not to engage with any family time. At times he has been violent, aggressive and out of control. For my husband and I, we have felt completely helpless to resolve this issue, which of course we are. This acceptance is possibly the biggest mental hurdle for all friends and family of an addict. I was introduced to the Scottish Gambling Hub through an online seminar set up by the Highland Council's Adoption Forum, a group of parents and carers who get together to share our experiences and support each other through the challenges that only other adopters can understand. The presentation by Donna was eye-opening in terms of the links between gaming and gambling, and certainly gave us a lot to talk to our son about. In honesty, he was quite shocked to realise that, you know, loot boxes were gambling. He thinks gambling is, so that was quite eye-opening for him. However, it was recognised that care experienced children are almost always also children of trauma, and therefore at a much higher risk of addiction. This very specific group of parents and carers needed to be reached to make them aware of the dangers of introducing their children to gaming. We realised that we needed to do something together to help raise this awareness. We started a parent focus group of adopters who were united by similar experiences to think about what we could do to help share some of the information we didn't have when we first started this journey. We began by co-producing a flyer with information about the links between gambling harm and childhood trauma, which was distributed to organisations working in and around child protection. And the next project we're working on is the podcast, with an episode that will focus on my family's experiences, as well as a discussion on what more can be done together in Scotland to raise awareness and ultimately reduce harm. It's been a privilege to share my experiences in this keynote today, and I'm looking forward to co-facilitating one of today's workshops to raise further awareness and start off some of those conversations. I'm also very happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. The hope is that by sharing a little of what we've been through, other families will feel that they are not alone in their own struggle with their child's gaming addiction. Thank you.